Well, good morning. Got one? Okay, Luke chapter 14. We preached through verses 25 through 33 2 weeks ago. Last week we celebrated Christmas from the book of Matthew. We are going to be covering the last two verses, verses 34 and 35. But because verse 34 begins with a therefore, I have to go back and remind you what we talked about in verses 25 through 33. This whole section is a section on discipleship. Discipleship is someone who follows someone else. It's pretty much that simple. And it's not just geography. It's not just that, the teacher is in front and the disciple is behind and following. It's that the disciple is listening to, paying attention to, learning from, and eventually emulating because they accept what the teacher is teaching them. And the teacher, as you know as parents, a teacher never just teaches by yakking. A teacher also teaches by example. So Jesus has stopped and turned around in the path to speak to the number of people, the great multitude that were following him. That word following can include geography. Could have been just some people moving along with them as they moved toward Jerusalem. But in my opinion, the majority of them, based upon what Jesus' discourse here or teaching was, were disciples. That is those who are saying, that's Jesus. That is, I think, the Christ. So I'm going to follow him and see what he can teach me so that I can more fully please God. So Jesus turns around and says some very difficult, pointed things that would cut to the heart, the core of a disciple's being. The first one, which we actually spent the majority of that sermon on, was verse 26, where if you do not hate your own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, yes, even your own self, you cannot be my disciple. And the course of that was that your love for God has to be so much that by comparison, your love and devotion and dedication and commitment to God makes your family relationships, your family in essence is what this is, and even your consideration for yourself, that which is all natural, you follow the supernatural so much in your love for God that the rest of it is as if it is hatred. A difficult concept because we live in the realm of the human and the physical, and when God presents spiritual things, we sometimes like to grab it, bring it down to our level, and then say, well, what God says is really stupid, short-sighted, impossible, and so on. Whereas us, he wants us to look at him and go to what he is saying, to his level, and comprehend and accept things from that standpoint. So we're confronted immediately with him saying, hate that which you naturally love. And there's a lot to those things, including, as I pointed out in that sermon, that this cuts to the core of, in a sense, why God even made us in the first place. He made us to reflect him and so on, but remember, he made a woman to complete the man so that they were a unit. And they were to serve God as a unit, a little government on earth, a husband and a wife working together to please God. And then from that came progeny to multiply and replenish. And then from that too, we look to the left and the right after generations, and we have brothers and sisters as well. And we are to love them. We are to honor them. It's what God has given us in this world to, in a sense, complete us as humans. Human relationship, fellowship, camaraderie, support, because that all reflects Him. So when Jesus says you cannot be my disciples unless you hate all that, it's not that we are to hate our parents. I spent a lot of time on that, so I'm going to stop here. But it's as if we are to love Him first. And that's where we go. The second one is like unto it. The first one was hate that which you love, all naturally. And then in verse 27, that turns around, love that which you hate. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So the cross, an implementation of death, a very visual public presentation, as the one behind me, a symbol of suffering and death. But for the Romans, it was a symbol that said Rome is right and you are wrong. So for us to carry our cross is to say God is right and I am wrong. So God's way is the way to go. So two things in this, as he turns around and confronts these people, their world is shifted because they're confronted with hating that which they naturally love to be his disciple, and then loving that which they naturally hate, the cross. No one loves the cross. It's an implement of suffering and shame. And then he talks about counting the cost of building a castle or a tower in verse 28. And because if you don't, verse 29, then there's obvious repercussions from that. You started, but you didn't finish. How shameful is that? Everybody would make fun of you because you just didn't have the wherewithal, the commitment to finish. And verse 30 completes that. Verse 31, talking about a king. No king in their right mind would go to war if they had 10,000 against someone who had 20. The natural statistics are 1-on-1, doink, leaves the person with 20,000 with 10,000 men left. Who wins? He does. So what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and take counsel whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming with 20,000 men? It's like insanity. Nobody really did that. I gave you an exception. Alexander the Great was definitely an exception, but there's other ramifications with that, so we'll leave that alone for now. So he deals with that in verse 32. And then in verse 33, he kind of, it's not the conclusion, because the conclusion is our sermon today, verses 34 and 35, but he kind of gives a capstone on that. So, therefore, because of all these things, no one of you can be my disciple. The third time in this short passage, he has said that. No one of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his own possessions. And in a sense, everything within our scope, which includes the family, our possessions, we give them over. You need to come to the position where nothing you own really belongs to you. And I'm not talking about the government owning it. We could have that discussion at a different time and place. But everything you have is God's supply, God's gift to you. Everything. Everything. So, who does not give up all of his possessions. And that's where so many times people are held back. People are held back by their things. Got too many toys. I remember visiting my, well, I won't tell you who, but somebody, we visited their home, and he showed me his Porsche. And of course, I know Porsches kind of like I know freighters, or, you know, I don't. So it was a beautiful car. It was a certain year. There weren't that many of them made, and it was absolutely spotless. And it even had, you can see the red brake thingies, because I don't know what they are. The red brake thingies inside the wheel, and I thought, this is impressive. And in essence, he said, yeah, I drive it, about once a month. Is that a possession, do you think? Well, so we have been talking about discipleship, and now, because there's a therefore in verse 34, Jesus is giving a conclusion, which I'll be honest with you, these two verses gave me pause and cause to reflect muchos. That's Spanish for a lot. So the title of this sermon, I guess, is Jesus teaches the disciple, or that the disciple must have the characteristics of a disciple. Okay. So this is the conclusion then of the cost of discipleship. So he begins with this pithy statement. And in the Greek, this is how it reads, excellent, therefore, the salt. That's how it reads. And most of our translation read, salt is good, therefore. The word good is has options. It's excellent, it's choice, that is like the choicest fruit on the tree and so on, select, and goodly. So good fits, but I'd like to elevate it to one of the possibilities, and that if Jesus just wanted to talk about good stuff, he could have mentioned anything. Yeah, he could have mentioned a three-legged dog. A three-legged dog is good for something, right? So I'm going to elevate it. I owned a three-legged dog at one point, so I know. But I'm going to elevate it to excellent. Salt, therefore, is excellent. Excellent the salt. Okay, so you're in the crowd, and you're thinking in terms of salt. Why would you think about salt? Well, in the ancient world, I found 4 things of which I understand 2. Okay, I'm not a scientist, but this is what I found. That salt was used as a catalyst for fire. Did you know that? Because I still don't know that. That's one of the things I don't know. So, anyway, just saying. It was good as a seasoning. I knew that. It was used as a preservative. I knew that. Okay, I'm good. It was used as fertilizer. I didn't know that. I still don't know that. So you can agree or disagree. I found that, and it's like, whatever. Some of you work, and I don't mean do work, but I mean some of you work for a wage. What do you receive? You receive a salary. What is that? Well, your salary is taken from the Latin, from the word sal, which is the Latin word for salt, which is how they paid the Roman soldiers in those days. At least that's what most scholars believe. I think there's some pushback on that, but I don't really care. So the Roman soldiers received salt as payment. And we take salt for granted because pretty much I think every one of us can open up and do this and we're good. But if you think about the older days, if you did not have access to a trade route in which somebody with a salt mine, let's say in Turkey, and you live up in Bulgaria, I don't know if there's any salt in Bulgaria, so you would certainly wait for that group to come by and give you salt or trade you salt. So salt had use. Excellent is salt. Salt is NaCl. You probably all knew that. And that means something. I just don't know what it means. NaCl. So on your table, your periodic table, there is NaCl, or there's Cl and there's Na. And together they are salt. So I've given this, well, you know what, before I've given a lot of thought, I'm going to go with C on your notes, which gives a bunch of parallels. Okay, so he's talking about salt. Excellent, therefore, the salt. Jesus used this figure many times. The Matthew 5:13, he says that we are salt. Okay, so there's a spiritual thought. In Mark chapter 9, verse 50, it's the same as here, but it's used in the context of judgment. Okay, that one's a little more difficult until we look at the Jewish sacrifices. Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13, salt was used in the grain offering. Okay, that one's a little bit difficult. In Ezekiel chapter 43, verse 24, salt is used in the meat offering. Okay. In Mark chapter 9, verse 49, which is the verse before the previous mention, in Mark, we are called salt as an offering. Okay. In Numbers chapter 18, verse 19, salt is used as payment to God, a redemptive price. Okay. In 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 5, it is a reference to the covenant with David. All of a sudden, with these Old Testament references, including salt in the sacrifices to God, it raises what my former concept of salt was. It was always, whenever I make my eggs at home, it's always salt and pepper. I like it that way. The eggs are seasoned. Without that, they're eggs. But with salt and pepper, they're eggs. That's the way I've always looked at salt. But what Jesus is doing here, in reference to salt, in the reference to the Jewish mind, would include sacrifice, would include grain and meat offerings, would include the concept of covenant, promise with God. A part of we use the word salt is a preservative, but what is the preservative doing? What the preservative is doing is halting corruption. I had never looked at it that way before, but that's what preservation is. It halts the corruption of whatever we're talking about. Salt itself cannot be spoiled by bacterial and microbial growth in meat and other foods. So there you go. It prevents corruption. So I always looked at when Jesus in Matthew said, "You are salt," I always looked at it as we are the seasoning of life. But I'm looking at it differently now. I'm looking at it as we are the ones that halt corruption. Not because of our own goodness, innate goodness, but because of what He has accomplished in us. And then He uses us to halt the corruption of the world. I like that concept. So, in all of this, and I struggled with this when I began realizing I'm going to be teaching 2 verses. And honestly, I know nothing about salt. When Jesus said in verse 34, "But if even salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned?" And I've known that my whole life. I mean, ever since I started reading the scriptures. And I always just assumed that NaCl could not be NaCl. But guess what? NaCl always is NaCl. Salt is always salt. It never changes. So I checked, and I couldn't tell you the name of the company. It starts with a K and ends with an A, but it's about this long. So don't know the name of the company, but they're stationed in Turkey, and they're a salt company. And so I contacted them, and they gave me some information. Their question was, can salt go bad? And the answer was yes and no. Don't you love that? Okay. Well, the no is what I've already said. NaCl remains NaCl. That it always is. The problem is when something else is mixed with it. Aha! So table salts, now we're back to what we call salt. Table salts with additives can lose their flavor and texture over time. Refined table salts contain iodine to enhance flavor and health properties, and anti-caking agents that protect it from clumping. These additives degrade over time. Therefore, table salts have approximately a 5-year shelf life, and then it's useless. Wow, did you guys actually learn something from my sermon? Well, as I was going over this, I said, Lord, I don't know anything about salt, except that I like it on my eggs. And I always looked at it as a flavor. But now I look at it as that which prevents corruption. Yes, it still adds flavor, but it's that which prevents corruption. So, why then, if Jesus knew this, does he say, but if even the salt becomes insipid, insipid is bland, unexciting. In case you didn't know what that was, it's insipid. Okay, big word. With what shall it be seasoned? Think about that. So you put salt on something and it's 6 years, and you go, nothing here. His question is, with what will you season the salt? Nothing. So what is Jesus doing here? It's one of those situations that Jesus brings to us, and we've seen it so many times already in Luke. Which of you fathers, when your son asks for an egg, will give him a rock? Or which of you asks for bread and he gives him a scorpion? And you kind of go, unless the father has just come out of a institution, nobody. The answer is nobody. No father would do that with his son. Nobody. So does Jesus ever give illustrations? There was one about, well, now it's a couple months ago, but where the slave obeyed his master, and the master gave him a huge dinner. And it's like, again, blink, blink, that doesn't happen. So does Jesus give us or teach us through things which never happen? Yes, he does. He's done it before, and he's doing it here. But if even the salt, and let's see, the New American Standard gives it, the King James skips it, the English Standard Version skips it. There is a chi in there, which is typically and, but sometimes it's used for emphasis. And so Jesus is emphasizing that if even salt, NaCl, which never changes, okay, but if even salt becomes insipid, loses its properties, how, in what way shall it be seasoned? And the answer is with nothing. I mean, useless plus useless equals useless. No good properties plus no good properties equal no good properties. So we end up with verse 35, neither into land nor into manure. You could, I mean, I grew up, on a farm, so there were cow patties all over, cow pies all over. If it was in the barn, it ended up in a manure pile. If it was out in the field, it just remained manure, and you knew what not to step in. So you can go either way. I think, what did I do? I actually made it a manure pile. I don't know why. It can go either way. So neither into land, into earth, nor into manure is it fit, proper, adapted, rightly deposed. So in other words, you take that insipid, useless salt, and it's useless to even throw out your door. Jesus is making a point. It's useless upon useless. It's useless. And he says it's really the only thing it's fit for is to be thrown out. And I always looked at that as one word, thrown out, but it's actually thrown out. So Jesus says there's an end to uselessness, and it's cast outside. He has an imperative here. He who has ears for hearing, let him hear. So what we've just done, we've covered from verse 25 through now verse 35. Jesus' closing statement is it's a call to pay attention. It's a call to hear. I can tell you, I can even point to a seat 15 years ago, a person in here who told someone else, I have no idea what he's talking about. Shared with somebody in their family that had no idea what Wayne was talking about. And back 15 years ago, I was still young, whatever. And it didn't dawn on me what was happening. Because I'd never, I guess, had it put so blatantly. But that person was not spiritually alive. They were playing, and therefore they could not hear spiritual things. They heard the words, but I might as well have been Peanut's mother. Same difference. So you take a look at this. You have just now heard these things from 2 weeks ago, a whole sermon, and then this one, which I told you in the email. Will I get through 2 verses? Maybe. You've heard these things. Where are they landing? See, the whole point isn't for you to sit here and spend 30 minutes of your life here with Wayne so you can go down and eat a good meal after that. It's to take in Jesus' words and let them, like the Pachinko machine, and it lands somewhere. The distance between this and this isn't that far, but they have to connect. And if you are saying, I have no idea what Wayne is talking about, you have 2 choices. Either ask me to repeat, or pray to God to give you ears to hear. Because these are spiritual truths. And specifically, and this is where it hits a discipleship church, this is specifically about discipleship. And I've warned us in these troubled times, there may be a cost to following Jesus, more than getting up at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning to get to church, or to give money to the church offering, or to show up on a work day. It could cost us all the way to our lives. It could. We don't know. So, whatever you do, and as difficult as this passage may seem, pray to the Lord God that you will be a better disciple by having the ears to hear what He says. And then determine that if you are indeed NACL, as Jesus described us in Matthew chapter 5, verse 19, then, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, then we are salt, and we must continue to have the properties and characteristics of salt in following God as, sure, a flavoring in this society, but also as that which will halt corruption. Yes, in us, but also in the sphere of influence that we have. So there you go. What a way to end 2021, huh? To the glory of God. Father, you have given us so much, and honestly, Lord, and you know this because I've struggled with these two verses, why in the world do you call me salt? Because I don't bring that much flavor to this world. But you have instructed me, you have taught me. I am NACL. I am salt. And Lord, by your grace and mercy, I will continue to exhibit the characteristics of salt in this world, because that's what you have called me, and that's what you have called me to. So by your grace, Father, may each heart here be prepared, ready, willing to be salt every day to the glory of God. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Joy to the world. What a thrill.